The hallway roared with the familiar chaos of a high school at lunchtime. Laughter echoed against the lockers. Sneakers squeaked across polished floors, and the chatter of 100 conversations overlapped in a restless storm of noise. Teenagers moved in clusters, some gossiping, some rushing to class, others leaning against walls pretending they didn't care about the world. In that sea of noise, almost no one noticed the man with the mop. Mr. Thomas pushed his bucket slowly down the hall, his steps quiet, careful not to disturb the tide of students rushing past him. His back was slightly hunched, his faded uniform neatly pressed but worn at the seams. His face carried lines carved by years of labor, but his eyes, though tired, still held a quiet dignity. Yet to most of the students, he was invisible. They brushed past him without a glance, stepping around the water he'd just mopped, sometimes even dragging muddy shoes right across his freshly cleaned floor. He didn't protest. He never did. He simply bent again, wringing the mop, doing the work no one else wanted to do. The narrator's voice cut through the noise, deep and heavy with emotion. In a world where status is mistaken for worth, where power is mistaken for respect, those who work in silence are often mocked, ignored, or forgotten. But what happens when cruelty crosses the line and dignity demands to be defended? The camera moved in slow motion, catching fragments of the hallway. A group of students laughing loudly, not at each other, but at the sight of Mr. Thomas struggling with a trash can, too heavy for one man. Others scrolling through their phones, capturing every second of the chaos, but never noticing the man who made their school livable. Teachers walking by, too busy to pay attention. Mr. Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. He wasn't just cleaning floors. He was carrying the weight of years of sacrifice, of hard work that few had ever appreciated. And still, no one clapped. No one said thank you. The narrator's tone sharpened almost like a warning. Today, laughter will turn to silence. Arrogance will be humbled, and respect, long forgotten in these halls, will be demanded by the most unexpected of voices. The hallway lights flickered slightly, footsteps echoing. Somewhere at the far end, a shadowy figure leaned against the wall, hood pulled low, watching everything. The camera didn't reveal his face. Not yet. Only the hint of towering shoulders, calm stillness, and an aura that seemed out of place in the chaos of high school noise. And as the students' laughter grew louder, one act of cruelty was about to tip the scales. The narrator's final words in this opening scene landed heavy, setting the stage for everything that was to follow. When a janitor is mocked for his work, it seems like just another day in a world that has forgotten respect. But today, someone is listening, and when he steps forward, nothing in this school will ever be the same again. Scene 1, the janitor's daily life. The school bell rang, sharp and metallic, releasing another wave of restless students into the halls. Backpacks bounced against lockers, sneakers pounded the floor, voices clashed in 1,000 conversations. It was loud, messy, alive, and there, moving at his own steady pace in the middle of it all, was Mr. Thomas. He was 63 years old, though the years sat heavier on his body than on his spirit. His frame was still broad, the remnants of the strong young man he once was, but his back carried the curve of time and labor. His hair, once black and thick, had thinned and turned gray, but his eyes, the deep brown of steady earth, still held a spark of quiet strength. He wore his janitor's uniform, clean but faded from countless washes. On his feet, a pair of old work boots scuffed from years of use. In his hands, a mop handle worn smooth where his fingers had gripped it day after day. Students streamed past him, barely noticing. He mopped steadily, pushing the bucket along, making sure no one slipped on the freshly cleaned tiles. When a student accidentally kicked over a soda can, Mr. Thomas bent slowly, picked it up, and tossed it into the trash without a word. No complaint, no frustration. Just work, done quietly, patiently, and with the kind of dignity that didn't need applause. The narrator's voice filled the scene, steady and reflective. Every school has someone like him, the one who stays after the lights go out, who locks the doors when everyone else has gone home, who cleans the messes no one else wants to admit they made. Invisible to most, mocked by some, appreciated by only a few. Mr. Thomas continued his rounds. He wiped down locker handles, polished smudged windows, and even tightened the loose screw on a classroom door that squeaked. It wasn't just his job. It was his pride. He did it well, not because anyone demanded excellence from him, but because he demanded it of himself. For a brief moment, as the camera followed him, we caught a glimpse of his past. A younger Mr. Thomas standing tall in a factory uniform, the noise of heavy machines filling the background. His hands were strong and steady, working steel, building with purpose. He was younger then, muscles thick with labor, his smile wide as he carried a lunchbox his wife had packed for him. But then came the injury. One bad fall on a slick floor, one broken back that never healed quite right. The factory let him go. And just like that, the man who had built his life on work was left searching for a new purpose. That's how he ended up here, cleaning a school where most didn't know his name. Back in the hallway, he continued his work. A group of students passed, laughing. One girl, polite, kind, smiled softly and whispered, "Good morning, Mr. Thomas." He looked up, surprised, and smiled back. "Good morning, sweetheart." Most didn't notice him, but the few who did reminded him that kindness still existed. As he wheeled his bucket around the corner, he spotted a crumpled poster half torn from the wall. Carefully, he straightened it, smoothed it out, and taped it back into place. It was an announcement for the school's guest speaker later that day. Special appearance, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Mr. Thomas chuckled to himself. "The Rock, huh? The kids will like that." He continued on, humming softly, his mop swishing against the tiles. A teacher passed him, barely glancing his way, muttering something about spilled coffee in the staff lounge. "On it," Mr. Thomas said quietly, even though the teacher hadn't really asked. The narrator's voice returned, heavy with meaning. He carried more dignity and silence than others did in all their noise. While the world raced past, chasing fame and comfort, he worked quietly in the background, unseen, unthanked, but never unliving the values of hard work and humility. Mr. Thomas stopped for a moment, leaning on his mop, watching the students crowding the lockers. He saw their energy, their laughter, their careless youth. For a brief second, his gaze softened, memories of his own children running through his mind. He had raised 3 kids, now grown and scattered across the country. He hadn't seen them in months, sometimes years. They had their own lives, their own struggles, but he didn't resent it. That wasn't his way. Instead, he simply whispered under his breath, almost like a prayer, "Keep them safe. Keep them strong." And with that, he went back to work. The camera lingered on him as he bent down to pick up another discarded piece of paper. To most, it was trash. To him, it was a job worth doing. Because no matter how the world treated him, Mr. Thomas knew one truth. Dignity was not given by others. It was carried within.
The hallway was alive with its usual midday chaos. Lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, voices bouncing off the walls. Mr. Thomas, mop in hand, moved with the same quiet rhythm he always carried, pushing his bucket slowly down the long stretch of polished floor. He stopped near the cafeteria doors, bending to scoop up a wad of crumpled paper tossed carelessly in the corner. With practiced ease, he tucked it into the trash bag at his side. But this time, not everyone walked past him. A group of students, loud, laughing, expensive sneakers flashing under the fluorescent lights, approached. They were the kind of kids who moved through the halls like they owned them. Designer clothes, flashy jewelry, the smugness of privilege written on their faces. At their center was Derek, the unofficial leader, tall and sharp-jawed, with arrogance dripping from every word he spoke. He nudged one of his friends and pointed at Mr. Thomas. "Look, there's the school's pet janitor. Man, doesn't he ever get tired of smelling like bleach?" The group burst into laughter. Mr. Thomas heard them, of course. He always did. But he kept his head down, continuing his work, his mop swishing steadily across the floor. That only made them bolder. As they passed the trash can near the lockers, Derek grinned wickedly and swung his foot. With one swift kick, the can toppled over, spilling candy wrappers, soda cans, and greasy paper onto the freshly mopped floor. The noise echoed through the hallway. Heads turned. Students nearby went silent, watching. Some gasped softly. Others chuckled nervously. Derek spread his arms like a performer on stage. "Oops," he said with mock innocence. "Guess we made a mess, but hey, isn't that your job anyway?" His friends roared with laughter. One pulled out his phone, angling it to record. Another shouted, "Yo, get this on TikTok! Mop Man versus Trash Mountain!" Mr. Thomas froze for a moment. He looked at the overturned garbage, at the sticky soda pooling across the floor, then at the laughing faces around him. His jaw tightened slightly. Not from anger. He had long since learned to control that. But from the sting of humiliation he could never quite erase. Still, he said nothing. Slowly, he bent down, his knees creaking with age, and began picking up the trash by hand, one wrapper at a time, one can at a time, carefully, methodically, refusing to let the mockery shake his quiet dignity. The students leaned in, laughing louder, their phones capturing every movement. "Hey, mop boy!" one of them jeered. "Why don't you do a little dance for us while you're down there? Show us some moves." Another added, "Yeah, spin the mop. Maybe we'll throw you some quarters for the show." The laughter echoed down the hall, cruel and cutting. Mr. Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he picked up a half-eaten burger from the floor. But still, he didn't speak. He placed it in the trash bag, lifted the can upright, and began mopping the spilled soda before anyone slipped. Around them, other students watched with growing discomfort. Some shifted uneasily, glancing at one another as if wondering whether to step in. A few looked down at their shoes, ashamed to even be present, but none of them spoke. None of them moved. The bullies kept laughing, louder now, emboldened by the silence of the crowd. Derek smirked, holding his phone higher. "Come on, man, give us a smile. You're famous now. Mop Boy goes viral. How's that sound?" The camera zoomed in on Mr. Thomas's bent back, on the lines of age etched across his face, on the quiet perseverance that seemed to mock their cruelty simply by existing. But they didn't see his strength. They only saw a target. One boy mimicked pushing a mop, exaggerating the motions in a ridiculous dance. The others cackled. "That's it. Look, Thomas, that's you, cleaning up after kings like us." Mr. Thomas straightened slowly, leaning on the mop for balance. His face was calm, but his eyes carried something deeper. Weariness, sorrow, the kind that comes from being reminded again and again that the world often measures worth in the wrong ways. He didn't lash out. He didn't curse. He simply returned to his work, silent and steady. The narrator's voice cut through the laughter, heavy with truth. Respect costs nothing, but cruelty. Cruelty is always expensive. Its debt is paid not in dollars, but in dignity. And those who mock the humble never realize the price they are writing for themselves. The camera lingered on the scene. Mr. Thomas, alone on the floor, mopping up the mess with quiet grace, surrounded by laughter that was beginning to sound less joyful and more hollow. In the background, the whispers started. Students who had once been silent now muttered to each other. A girl shook her head in disgust. A boy clenched his fists but stayed frozen in place. The unease spread like cracks through the crowd. For a brief moment, the laughter wavered. But Derek, unwilling to lose his audience, raised his voice again. "Don't worry, guys. Mop Man loves it. It's all he's good for." The group erupted once more, though their laughter was forced, weaker than before. Mr. Thomas said nothing. He finished mopping, wrung out the mop, and pushed his bucket forward. His silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint, but the cruelty hung in the air like smoke, choking every witness, and somewhere, unseen at the end of the hallway, another figure was watching, quiet, still, waiting. Scene 3. The pain. The laughter still echoed faintly in the hallways, long after the crowd had dispersed. Even when the students had moved on to the cafeteria. Even when the hallway had returned to its ordinary rhythm of chatter and footsteps. The sting of those voices clung to the walls like a foul odor. Mr. Thomas pushed his bucket slowly toward the janitor's closet at the far end of the hall. Each squeak of the wheels seemed louder than it should have been, pressing against the silence. His face was calm on the outside, as it always was, but inside, the silence was heavier than the laughter had ever been. He reached the small supply closet, slipped inside, and shut the door quietly behind him. The lock clicked, shutting out the world, leaving him alone with the smell of bleach, dust, and the faint hum of the overhead bulb. In the cramped space, surrounded by brooms and cleaning supplies, the mask slipped. Mr. Thomas leaned heavily against the wall, his shoulders sagging. His hands gripped the mop handle, not as a tool, but as a lifeline keeping him from collapsing. Slowly, he pressed his hand against his face, wiping away the moisture gathering in his tired eyes. He whispered to himself, voice trembling, "Just one more day. You can do this. Just one more day." The words were a mantra, the same one he had repeated to himself countless times before. Every morning when the alarm rang at 4:30, every night when his back ached so badly he could barely bend, every time the laughter cut deeper than he let anyone see. But today the words felt weaker. He lowered himself onto the small stool tucked in the corner, his body folding like a man carrying decades of weight. He stared down at his hands, calloused, trembling, cracked from years of scrubbing floors and fixing what others broke. Hands that had once been strong, capable, hands that had held his children close when they were small, when they thought their father could carry the world. And just like that, the memories came flashback. The light in his mind shifted. He saw himself younger, 30 years old, sweat dripping down his forehead in the heat of a factory. Machines clanged all around him, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air. His shirt was damp, his arms ached, but his eyes held fire, because he wasn't working just for himself. At home, 2 small children waited. His daughter, with her endless questions and wide-eyed dreams of becoming a teacher. His son, clutching a toy soldier, saying he wanted to be brave like his dad. And his wife, tired but smiling, trusting him with their future. He remembered those nights, working double shifts, barely sleeping, coming home to kiss them while they still slept. Never complaining, never once letting them see the exhaustion carved into his bones, because that was his duty, to provide, to protect, to carry. He remembered the Christmas mornings when the gifts were few, but the joy was endless. He remembered teaching his son how to ride a bike, his daughter how to spell her name. He remembered his wife's quiet squeeze of his hand when they barely had enough money for bills, but made it through anyway. And then, he remembered the day it all changed. The factory closed. Jobs were cut, promises of pensions and benefits crumbled into dust. His back injury worsened, opportunities vanished, and he took what work he could find. Custodian, janitor, cleaner, titles that others mocked, but to him, it was never about pride. It was about survival, about making sure his family never went hungry, about standing tall even when life tried to bow him. Back to the present, Mr. Thomas blinked, the vision fading, the supply closet walls closing in once more. He rubbed his face with his hands, whispering to himself again, quieter this time. Did it mean anything? Did all of it mean anything? His voice cracked. The question hung in the air, heavier than the mop leaning against the wall. He thought of his children, now grown, living their own lives, calling less often than they used to. He thought of his late wife, gone too soon, whose smile still haunted him in dreams. He thought of every sacrifice, every hour spent in silence, and wondered if the world had simply forgotten. From outside the closet door, muffled voices drifted in, the laughter of Derek and his friends still carrying from down the hall. Their arrogance, their cruelty, their ignorance, they were proud of what they had done, proud of making a man like him a punchline.
Scene 4. The Rock arrives. The camera cuts sharply away from Mr. Thomas's weary footsteps and shifts down the long, echoing hallways of the high school. Banners hang proudly from the rafters above the gym entrance. Welcome, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Motivational assembly today. The bold letters stretch across bright blue fabric, fluttering faintly from the school's air vents. Excitement buzzed through the school all morning. Students whispered about the celebrity guest. Teachers shuffled nervously with clipboards, and the principal had rehearsed his welcome speech 3 times in the mirror. But for now, the gym was empty. The assembly hadn't started yet, and somewhere in the chaos, a man had already arrived. A quiet entrance. The double doors near the back hallway creaked open, unnoticed by most. Through them stepped a towering figure dressed simply. Dark hoodie, fitted joggers, boots that landed on the tile floor with a steady weight. No entourage, no cameras, no spotlights, just him, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. He walked quietly, his pace unhurried, his eyes scanning the walls filled with trophies, class photos, and student artwork. His shoulders filled the narrow hallway, yet his presence wasn't intrusive. It was calm, solid, a mountain moving with intention, and yet nobody noticed. Students brushed past, too consumed by their chatter, their phones, their laughter. Teachers hustled by with folders in hand, too focused on preparing the gym for his grand official entrance. To them, this man in casual clothes was invisible, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The scene unfolds as he turned the corner into the main hall. The sound hit him before the sight did. Laughter. Not the joyful kind, but sharp, cutting, ugly. The kind of laughter that wasn't shared but directed at someone. The Rock slowed his steps, eyes narrowing. His boots pressed down softly against the tile, each stride calculated. And then he saw it. Down the corridor, a group of students clustered together, phones raised, grins wide. Their expensive sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as they jostled each other, mocking, recording, laughing. At their feet, a trash can lay tipped over, spilling wrappers, soda cups, and half-eaten food across the hall. And in the middle of it all, bent low, hands shaking as he gathered the trash, was Mr. Thomas, the janitor. The man who had once walked with pride now crouched in humiliation, his faded jacket stretching across tired shoulders. His mop leaned against the wall, forgotten for the moment, while cruel voices rained down on him. "Hey, mop boy, you missed a spot. Pick it up faster, my phone's running out of storage. Dance for us, old man, make it funny." The laughter roared. Phone cameras zoomed in. A boy kicked a soda cup toward him, splattering sticky liquid across the floor. The group howled even louder, and still, Mr. Thomas said nothing. His jaw tightened. His hands continued to pick up the trash one piece at a time. Silent, dignified, broken. The Rock's silence. The Rock stopped halfway down the hallway. He didn't move forward, not yet. He simply stood there, his massive frame filling the space, his hood casting a shadow over his face. His eyes locked on the scene before him, unblinking, steady as stone. The students hadn't noticed him yet. They were too busy watching their own cruelty on the screens of their phones. Too busy laughing at the man on his knees. But a few bystanders noticed. A girl holding books near the lockers froze, her eyes widening. She nudged her friend, whispering urgently, her voice trembling. "Wait, isn't that?" The word spread like wildfire through the hallway, though spoken in hushed tones. Heads turned. Gasps slipped through the crowd. Slowly, recognition dawned. The Rock. He hadn't spoken a word. He hadn't taken a single step closer. But his silence was louder than the mockery, heavier than the laughter. The camera zoomed in on his hands, massive, clenched at his sides, veins visible under the skin. Not in anger, but in control. His jaw set, his chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. Every inch of him radiated a calm intensity, the kind of energy that shifts the atmosphere without sound. And the narrator's voice cut in, low and powerful. Sometimes, silence is the greatest storm before the thunder. The atmosphere shifts, the laughter began to falter, not all at once, but in pieces. A boy glanced up from his phone, his smile fading as his eyes met the hooded figure down the hall. He nudged his friend nervously, pointing. "Bro, look." One by one, the bullies noticed. Their arrogance wavered. Their grins trembled. Phones lowered. The hall grew quieter, the cruel echoes replaced by whispers. The Rock didn't move. He simply watched, and in that watchfulness, the weight of their actions grew heavier. Without a word, he forced them to see themselves, not through the lens of their phones, but through the reflection in his gaze. The janitor, still bent low, didn't notice him. His focus was on the trash in his hands, on the dignity he clung to even in humiliation. He whispered faintly to himself, "Just one more day," unaware that a storm was gathering behind him. Suspense builds. The Rock finally shifted, just slightly. One step forward. The sound of his boot echoed like thunder in the hushed hallway. The bullies stiffened. Their laughter died completely. Some lowered their heads, others looked away, suddenly ashamed. The phones disappeared into pockets. The arrogance that had seemed so unshakable moments earlier crumbled in the weight of silence. He took another step. And another, slow, purposeful, each movement deliberate, as if the earth itself bent beneath him. And though he still hadn't spoken, every student felt it. The tide had turned. Something unforgettable was about to happen. The camera zoomed on his face, half hidden beneath the hood, eyes burning with unspoken fury. Not the fury of violence, but of justice. The narrator's voice returned, resonant and heavy. The halls of cruelty echo louder when no one stands against it. But on this day, silence would not be weakness. It would be power. And when the storm broke, nothing would ever be the same. The Rock reached the edge of the crowd, still silent, still towering, his shadow falling across the students who had moments ago laughed with pride. The janitor finally looked up, startled by the sudden hush. His tired eyes widened as they landed on the massive figure standing just beyond the circle. For the first time that day, hope flickered, and though the Rock had yet to speak, everyone knew the thunder was coming. Scene 5. The confrontation. The hall was silent now, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your own heartbeat sound louder than a drum. The bullies who just moments ago were laughing loudly now shifted uncomfortably, their bravado draining away as the Rock's shadow stretched over them. He was close now, close enough that they could feel his presence like heat radiating from the sun. His massive frame filled the space, his hood still partially concealing his face, but everyone knew who it was. Gasps still rippled through the crowd, but nobody dared to speak, face to face with fear. The Rock stopped just inches from the group of students. They craned their necks to look up at him. One boy, still gripping his phone, tried to force a weak laugh. "Hey, we were just joking, man," he stammered, his voice cracking. "It wasn't, serious." The Rock's gaze locked on him, calm, steady, unblinking. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence alone made the boy's words crumble. Slowly, deliberately, the Rock extended his hand. The boy hesitated, clutching the phone tighter as if it could shield him. But under that stare, resistance was impossible. Shaking, he placed the phone into the Rock's palm. Without a word, the Rock tapped the screen, found the recording, and pressed delete. The sound of the clip vanishing into digital nothingness echoed louder than any bell. The boy swallowed hard, his face pale, his hands trembling. Turning to Mr. Thomas, then the Rock did something no one expected. He turned away from the bullies and looked at Mr. Thomas. The janitor froze, still crouched on the floor, his wrinkled hands full of discarded wrappers. His tired eyes blinked in disbelief. The Rock's voice finally broke the silence, deep and steady. "Sir, you don't need to pick that up." "I'll do it." Gasps burst from the crowd like air escaping a balloon. Students exchanged wide-eyed glances. Was he serious? The Rock, one of the biggest stars in the world, kneeling to pick up trash. But that's exactly what he did. The Rock kneels in one smooth motion. The giant lowered himself to the ground, his knees pressing against the cold tile. He reached for the crumpled paper cups, the sticky soda-soaked napkins, the food wrappers scattered across the hall. His enormous hands gathered them gently, carefully, as though they weren't trash at all but something of value. The hallway buzzed with disbelief. Phones were raised again, but this time not to mock. For once, they were capturing something worth remembering. Mr. Thomas's lips parted, his voice a whisper barely audible over the stunned silence. You don't have to." But the Rock only glanced up at him, his eyes soft yet firm. "Yes, I do. The lesson begins, The last wrapper was in his hands. The Rock rose to his full height. He stood taller than everyone, the hallway itself seeming too small to contain him. He held the trash for a moment, then turned his gaze on the bullies. His voice rolled like thunder, not loud but commanding, carrying weight that pierced every heart in the hall. "If you think this man is beneath you," he said, lifting a finger and pointing toward Mr. Thomas, "then you don't even know what respect means." The bullies squirmed, their faces red with shame. Their earlier smirks had vanished, replaced with downcast eyes and nervous fidgeting. The other students who had stayed silent shifted uncomfortably, guilt washing over them for having done nothing, respect redefined. The Rock continued, his tone even but heavy with conviction. "This man works harder in one day than most of you ever will. He cleans up after you, keeps this school running, and never complains. And what do? You laugh. You record. You treat him like he's invisible. He paused, letting the words sink in. The trash still crumpled in his giant hand became a symbol, a weight heavier than gold. You think respect comes from money? From clothes? From how many followers you have? No. His eyes scanned the hallway, pinning every student in place. Respect is earned through dignity, through sacrifice, through doing what needs to be done even when nobody thanks you for it. Mr. Thomas lowered his head, overcome with emotion. The same man who had been invisible for years now stood at the center of the world's attention, and all because someone finally spoke truth. The crowd reacts. Murmurs filled the hall. Some students wiped their eyes, ashamed of having laughed along or stayed silent. A girl whispered to her friend, "He's right. We never even say thank you to him." Even the teachers who had peeked out of classrooms when the commotion started now stood frozen, watching the lesson unfold. The weight of silence was gone, replaced by the heavy, humbling truth of the Rock's words. The bullies tried to shrink away, but the Rock wasn't finished. Final blow. He tossed the trash into the can with one swift motion, then stepped closer to the boys. His size dwarfed them, his presence suffocating, yet his voice softened, not cruel but cutting with honesty. If you think making fun of someone's hard work makes you bigger, you're wrong. It makes you smaller. So small that the world will forget your names. But this man? He turned back to Mr. Thomas, gesturing with open hands. This man will be remembered, not because he sought fame, but because he gave dignity to a job no one else wanted to do. The bullies stared at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. Their arrogance had drained out completely, leaving only shame. Mr. Thomas's moment. The Rock finally turned back to the janitor, his expression softening. He extended a hand, not the hand of a celebrity, but of a man offering respect. "Sir," he said gently, "you've carried this school on your back day after day, and it's time someone carried you." Tears welled in Mr. Thomas's eyes. His hand trembled as he reached out, grasping the Rock's firmly. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as the janitor, but as a man worthy of dignity. The crowd erupted into applause. Not forced, not hesitant, but real. Raw. Students clapped, some cheered, others cried quietly. Narrator's voice. And over the scene, the narrator's voice returned, deep and resonant. Respect is not measured by the clothes you wear or the job you do. Respect is measured by the heart you carry, and the way you treat those who carry the weight of the world quietly. The Rock still stood tall, his hand gripping Mr. Thomas's as the hallway roared with applause. But the look in his eyes was not pride, it was resolve, because this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the lesson.
Scene 6. The Rock's words. The applause echoed through the hall, bouncing off the lockers like a thunderclap. Mr. Thomas stood frozen, his rough, work-worn hands still trembling in the Rock's grasp. The bullies shifted uneasily, their heads bowed, while the rest of the students stared in awe. Phones were raised, but for once they weren't tools of mockery. They were witnesses to something unforgettable. The Rock raised his other hand, palm open, gently calling for silence. Slowly, the clapping faded. The hallway stilled again, all eyes on him. His deep voice carried through the space, every word deliberate, heavy with meaning. The Rock's story. "You know," he began, glancing down at Mr. Thomas before lifting his gaze back to the students. "I wasn't always the Rock." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Everyone had heard of him as the superstar, the wrestler, the actor, the man who seemed larger than life. But now he was speaking like a man stripped of all titles, just himself. "There was a time," he continued, "when I had nothing. My mom and I, evicted from our home, nowhere to go. I was broke. I didn't have fame, I didn't have respect, I didn't even have a bed to sleep in. All I had was $7 in my pocket." Gasps rippled through the students. $7? The Rock? They could barely believe it. "I worked any job I could find," he said, his voice softening with memory. "I cleaned gyms. I scrubbed toilets. I mopped floors, just like this man here does every single day." He gestured toward Mr. Thomas, who looked down, overwhelmed. The crowd leaned in, hanging on every word, respect for work. The Rock's tone sharpened, his words striking like hammers. "You kids think mocking someone for their job makes you stronger? You think it makes you cool to laugh while someone works hard to keep your world clean? Let me tell you something. Mocking someone for their work doesn't make you powerful. It makes you weak, pathetic. The students flinched at the word. Even those who hadn't joined in but had stayed silent felt the sting. Their faces burned with guilt. Every single one of you walks these halls without thinking about who keeps them shining. You eat in that cafeteria without asking who scrubs the floors after you leave your trash behind. You play sports in that gym. And do you ever think about who sets up the bleachers, who keeps the bathrooms usable, who makes sure your school doesn't fall apart? Silence. Eyes dropped. The truth hit harder than any lecture they'd ever heard. The Rock's hand on Mr. Thomas. The Rock turned back to Mr. Thomas and placed his massive hand firmly on his shoulder. His voice softened, warm but commanding. "This man right here," he said slowly, "is the hardest worker in this entire building. Harder than the principal, harder than the teachers, harder than any student. Without him, this school doesn't run. Without him, your day doesn't start. He's the backbone, the foundation, and you've treated him like he's invisible." Tears welled in Mr. Thomas's eyes. For decades, he had pushed his mop, carried his tools, bent his back without recognition. And now, in front of hundreds of students, he was finally seen. The teachers. Gather. Teachers had stepped out of classrooms drawn by the commotion. They stood at the edges of the crowd, some with their arms folded, others wiping their eyes. Even they looked humbled, because the Rock's words weren't just for the kids. They were for everyone. One teacher whispered to another, "He's right. We never really thank him, do we?" The Rock continued, his voice rising with passion. "The lesson on greatness. Listen to me carefully," he said, scanning the hallway. His eyes locked on the bullies first, then swept across the crowd. "No job is small, not one. What's small is the person who looks down on another human being because of what they do to survive. Greatness isn't about how much money you make or how many people know your name. Greatness is about respect. Respect for yourself and respect for others." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. You want to be great? Start here. Start by respecting the people who carry the weight of the world on their shoulders without applause. Respect the janitors, the cafeteria workers, the bus drivers. Respect your parents when they come home tired. Respect the people who sacrifice quietly so you can live loudly. The students listened, some with tears streaming down their faces, others clenching their fists in guilt and realization. The shift in the hall won. By one, students lowered their phones. The glow of the screens dimmed. They weren't recording anymore. They were listening. Really listening. The bullies shuffled uneasily, their arrogance fully dissolved. One boy muttered, "We're sorry," but his voice was drowned in the silence of shame. The Rock wasn't finished. Final words. He lifted his voice one last time. The final strike of thunder in the storm. Respect doesn't cost you a single thing. Not a dollar, not a dime. But giving respect, it can change a person's entire life. It can save a soul. It can build a community. And it can change you. He squeezed Mr. Thomas's shoulder, his voice breaking into something softer, more human. "This man is a hero, and it's about time you all started treating him like one." The applause. For a moment, silence held. Then, as if a dam had burst, the hallway erupted into applause. Not nervous, not hesitant, real, heartfelt applause that shook the lockers and rattled the floor. Students clapped, teachers clapped, even some staff who had come out of offices joined in. The sound was thunderous, unified, unstoppable. Mr. Thomas stood in the center of it all, eyes brimming with tears, his face glowing with something he hadn't felt in years, dignity. And the Rock, towering beside him, didn't smile for the cameras or bask in the praise. He simply nodded, his arm steady around the janitor's shoulders as though to say, "This moment isn't about me. It's about him."
Scene 7, the janitor's truth. The thunder of applause slowly faded into a reverent hush. The Rock's hand remained steady on Mr. Thomas's shoulder, anchoring him in the moment. His voice softened as he leaned closer. "Sir," the Rock said, looking him in the eyes with genuine respect, "they've heard from me. Now they need to hear from you. Please, tell them who you are." For a long moment, Mr. Thomas froze. His eyes flickered across the hallway, meeting the stares of dozens, no, hundreds of young faces. His throat tightened. He wasn't used to being seen, let alone being asked to speak. He had always lived in the background, the quiet figure with the mop. I don't know what to say," he whispered. The Rock's voice was gentle yet firm. "Say the truth. Say what's in your heart." Mr. Thomas drew a shaky breath. He set his mop aside and stood taller, though his back ached from years of labor. His eyes swept across the hallway, past the students who mocked him, past the teachers who had ignored him, and finally toward the faces that now looked at him not with disdain, but with anticipation. The story begins. "My name is Thomas," he began, his voice hoarse but steady. "Most of you just call me the janitor, but that's not all I am." The hallway was so quiet that even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed loud. I worked nearly 30 years in a factory, day in, day out, running machines, sweating through double shifts. My hands bled. My back broke. But I kept working because I had 3 children at home who needed food, clothes, and a future. Gasps came from the students. They glanced at his hands, scarred, calloused, cracked with age, and suddenly they saw more than just a man with a mop. They saw sacrifice. "I raised my kids on hard work," he continued. "Taught them to say yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. Taught them that nothing in this world is free. And if you want to sleep with peace in your heart, you earn it with honesty, loss, and resilience." His voice trembled now. "I had a wife too. She was my world. Sweetest smile you ever saw. She'd pack my lunch every morning before I left for the factory. But then cancer took her. Too soon." The students shifted uncomfortably, some biting their lips, others lowering their heads. Even the bullies, who had once sneered, now stared at their shoes, unable to meet his gaze. "I thought about giving up after that," Mr. Thomas admitted, his eyes glistening. "When the house was empty, when the chair at the kitchen table stayed cold, I asked myself what was the point." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "But then I looked at my grandchildren, and I promised myself I would keep going. I would keep working, not for glory, not for applause, but so that when they looked at me, they'd see a man who didn't quit, a man who left the world just a little cleaner than he found it." The words that broke them. He let the silence carry his words, heavy as stone. Students' eyes filled with tears. A girl in the back clutched her friend's arm, whispering, "He's incredible." A boy wiped his face quickly, embarrassed to be crying. Mr. Thomas continued softly, but every word struck deep. "You see me pushing this mop and think I'm nothing. But to me, this mop, it's my promise, my way of giving back even in little ways. I don't need glory. I don't need trophies. All I need is to know that when I'm gone, this school, these halls, this world, are just a little better because I was here." His voice cracked on the last words, but he stood taller than he had in years. The students' reaction. The hallway rippled with emotion. Some students covered their mouths, others let tears stream freely. A teacher pressed her hand to her chest, whispering, "God, we never knew." Even the bullies, those loud, arrogant kids who had kicked over his trash can and mocked him to his face, could no longer hide behind smirks. Their heads were bowed, shoulders heavy with shame. One boy whispered to the other, "We messed up. Bad." Mr. Thomas looked at them, not with anger, but with quiet dignity. His gaze alone was enough to strip away their arrogance. The Rock's response. The Rock finally spoke, his voice softer than before but filled with awe. "Did you hear that? That's what greatness sounds like. That's what sacrifice looks like. This man, this janitor, is more of a hero than half the people who get their names in the spotlight." He turned to the students, his expression firm. "You laughed at him because you thought his life meant less. But now you see his life has meant more than you can imagine. More than money. More than fame. More than arrogance ever will. The moment of transformation, Mr. Thomas's eyes glistened, but for the first time he didn't look down. He looked straight ahead, shoulders squared, standing in the center of the hallway like a man finally seen. The narrator's voice cut in, weaving through the silence. He carried more dignity in his silence than others did in all their noise. And when his truth was finally spoken, the world realized it had been blind all along. The final words of his truth, Mr. Thomas gave one last smile, small but full of meaning. "I don't need anyone to call me a hero. I just need to know that the kids in this school, the next generation, learn one thing from me: respect." Because respect costs nothing. But without it, you lose everything. A hush swept the room again, deeper this time. Some students clutched their books like shields. Others bowed their heads, the weight of his truth pressing down on them. And the bullies, their arrogance shattered, stood trembling, their faces pale. For the first time in their lives, they felt the crushing weight of guilt. The hallway still pulsed with silence after Mr. Thomas's words. His truth hung in the air, heavy but liberating, like a storm that had finally broken after years of tension. The Rock's towering figure stood beside him, a shield of respect, while students and teachers alike looked on, humbled, changed. The Rock turned toward the crowd, his voice calm but commanding. This man deserves more than your silence. He deserves your honor. The principal steps forward. From the back of the crowd, the school principal, usually stern, usually busy, pushed his way through the sea of students. His face was pale, his eyes glistening with shame. He stopped in front of Mr. Thomas, straightening his tie with trembling hands. "Mr. Thomas," he said quietly, his voice cracking, "I owe you an apology. We all do. For years we've let you fade into the background, unseen, unappreciated, when the truth is this school couldn't run without you." He paused, then spoke louder for all to hear. "From this day forward, our annual service award will be named after you, the Thomas Honor, so that every student who passes through these halls will remember your dedication and your dignity." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, followed by a burst of applause. Mr. Thomas's eyes widened, his lips trembling. He had never imagined his name would be spoken with such reverence. The students' apologies, one by one, students began to step forward. A girl with braces wiped her eyes as she reached out her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for always making sure our halls were clean, even when we never said thank you." He took her hand gently, his calloused palm rough against hers. He nodded silently, too moved for words. Then came another, a boy who had once laughed at him in passing. His voice cracked with guilt. "I'm sorry, sir. I was wrong. We were wrong. You deserve better." Finally, the bullies, the same ones who had mocked him so cruelly only minutes earlier, shuffled forward. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by shame written across their faces. The ringleader, the boy who had kicked the trash can, stared at the floor as he spoke. "Mr. Thomas, we were jerks. We thought we were being funny, but we were cruel. If you'll let us, we want to help you. Clean up, carry supplies, whatever it takes. Not because we have to, but because we need to." Mr. Thomas studied them for a long moment. His eyes softened. "Respect doesn't start with words," he said quietly. "It starts with actions. Show me through what you do." The boys nodded, their faces earnest. The Rock's closing words. The Rock stepped forward again, placing a massive hand on Mr. Thomas's shoulder. His voice rose, strong and steady. "Respect starts today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today." He turned toward the students, his gaze sweeping the hall like a commandment carved into stone. "This man you ignored, mocked, even recorded for laughs. He is the backbone of this school. Without him, you don't have clean classrooms, safe hallways, or working lights. And without respect, you don't have a community. You just have chaos." The students stood straighter, their heads bowed in understanding. The teachers nodded solemnly. Even the principal dabbed at his eyes. The atmosphere transforms. The hallway that had once been filled with laughter at cruelty now pulsed with something new: unity. Students moved closer to Mr. Thomas, surrounding him not with judgment but with respect. Some clapped, some whispered thank you. Others simply smiled at him with newfound admiration. Teachers gathered around too, offering handshakes, pats on the back, promises to do better. For the first time in years, Mr. Thomas wasn't invisible. He wasn't the background. He was the heart of the room. The camera panned across the faces, once smug, now humbled, once indifferent, now grateful. Tears mingled with smiles. The air itself seemed lighter. The janitor's dignity restored Mr. Thomas stood taller than ever before. He didn't speak much, he didn't need to. His silence now carried pride, not shame. His eyes glistened as he looked at the students and teachers who had once ignored him. The Rock leaned down, his voice low but filled with pride. "You came in here invisible, Mr. Thomas, but now they'll never forget your name." Mr. Thomas smiled faintly, whispering, "I don't need fame. Just respect." The Rock's eyes softened. "And today, You earned all of it back. Final narration. The narrator's voice broke in as the camera slowly pulled back, capturing the crowd gathered around Mr. Thomas in a circle of unity. That day, a janitor mocked as worthless was honored as priceless. A group of bullies learned that cruelty shatters in the face of dignity, and an entire school discovered that no job is small, but mocking someone's hard work will always make you small. The final shot lingered on Mr. Thomas holding his mop, not as a symbol of humiliation, but as a badge of honor. Around him, students smiled, teachers applauded, and the rock stood tall, a silent guardian of respect. Fade out. Text on screen. Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. The hallway echoed with something it hadn't carried in years. Not the noise of arrogance, not the laughter of cruelty, but the sound of unity. Mr. Thomas, once the invisible figure sweeping corners no one cared to notice, now stood at the center of admiration, surrounded by students and teachers alike. His mop no longer seemed a tool of servitude, but a symbol of resilience, of quiet dignity that could not be broken, no matter how many years it had gone unrecognized. The camera panned slowly, capturing the new scene. Students gathering around him, offering to help carry supplies, asking questions about his life, promising to do better. Even the bullies who had once mocked him so loudly now followed behind him quietly, humbled, carrying trash bags, awkward but sincere in their desire to make amends. The laughter that had once been cruel had been replaced with nervous chuckles of apology, and slowly with genuine warmth. The Rock, standing off to the side, watched silently. His broad shoulders filled the frame, but his presence didn't demand the spotlight. Instead, it lifted another man higher. His faint smile carried pride, not for himself, but for the janitor whose dignity had been restored. He had given the moment to the man who deserved it. The narrator's voice returned, deep, steady, cutting through the silence like a truth everyone already felt in their bones. That day, a man once invisible became unforgettable. The shot focused on Mr. Thomas's face as he walked the hall, his steps steadier than before, his head held higher. The children around him no longer rushed past. They walked beside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't simply there. He mattered. Students learned that mocking dignity is weakness, but honoring it is strength. The camera lingered on the bullies. Their heads bowed, their phones forgotten. They now carried brooms and buckets, working alongside the janitor. Their arrogance shattered, replaced with humility. Their earlier cruelty had become a turning point, a painful mistake that led them to a lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. Teachers, too, joined in. Some apologized, some thanked him, and others simply placed a hand on his shoulder in quiet solidarity. Respect had spread through the school like a fire, burning away the indifference, lighting a path to something greater. And when the Rock stood beside a janitor, he reminded us, true respect is never about titles, but about character. The Rock moved closer to Mr. Thomas once more, placing a hand on his shoulder as if to seal the moment in stone. His gaze swept across the hallway full of students, his expression firm but hopeful. He didn't need to speak. His actions had already written the lesson in every heart present. He had knelt for a janitor, and in doing so, lifted him higher than any podium could. The final sequence unfolded like a quiet triumph. Mr. Thomas walked slowly down the hall, his mop in one hand, but beside him walked students carrying bags of trash, wiping lockers and pushing brooms. What had been a job forced upon one man was now a shared responsibility, an act of gratitude rather than mockery. He smiled softly, a man whose dignity had been bruised but never broken, now finally seen for the hero he truly was. The camera pulled back, widening the frame until the hallway stretched endlessly, filled with students working together. Mr. Thomas was no longer a silhouette in the background. He was a figure of honor, his story etched into the walls of the school forever. The narrator's voice grew stronger as the music swelled, emotional strings rising with each word. No job is small, but mocking someone's hard work makes you small. The screen faded to black, the words appearing in bold white letters, lingering for a moment longer than usual, as if demanding the audience carry them out of the story and into their own lives. And with that, the lesson was complete.